Hello everyone, we are today here at the Military History Museum of the Bundeswehr in Dresden, and this is Seine.
Hello.
And we will talk about the Hetzer 2.0 or the Hetzer of the Cold War, question mark. So basically we talk about the Jagdpanzer concept in the Bundeswehr from the Kanonen-Jagdpanzer, the cannon, tank, hunter or tank destroyer, up to the missile tank destroyers, basically. They were the Raketen-Jagdpanzer and then the Jaguar.
Yeah. Again, as with many other combat vehicles of the Bundeswehr, there was an influence of old Wehrmacht veterans, who served in the Bundeswehr after the war. And of course, they discussed their experience of World War II. And they wanted to have a hunter tank, as you say in English, I think.
Tank destroyer.
Tank destroyer, yeah.
Tank hunter is the Jagdpanzer.
It's literally as a tank destroyer. And there was one called Kanonen-Jagdpanzer, and if you look at the shape of this and if you look at what's written in the literature, it's said it has its roots in the Jagdpanzer 4. Maybe also in the Hetzer, because the Hetzer is same shape, more or less, but smaller. Yeah. And they had the Kanonen-Jagdpanzer, and soon, so around 60s, in the 60s, they had also a rocket tank destroyer, so a tank destroyer tank only equipped with a ATGM, because the ATGM, so the anti-tank guided missiles, were introduced in the 1950s. And in the 1960s, they were ready to put it on the tanks. And so they used also already on the tank destroyer with anti-tank rockets. So in the 70s, it turned out that the rockets are much more efficient than the cannons. So the Kanonen-Jagdpanzer was rearmed mostly or dissolved, depends on, into rockets with ATGM. And the Bundeswehr at the end of the Cold War had two tank destroyers called Jaguar 1 and Jaguar 2. This had very much to do with the wars in the 1970s, especially again the Yom Kippur War, where a lot of tanks were killed by ATGMs from both sides, especially from Arabian ATGMs.
But those were produced by the Soviets.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one thing to add, because some people will know, these are rather fast, right?
Quite fast.
Because this is the main difference to the Hetzer, which was not particularly fast, although the name suggests otherwise.
And interestingly, the Bundeswehr tried, at least with prototypes, to save the cannon concept with the tank destroyers in the so-called Versuchsträger. And they are available again in Münster and in the WTS, I think. And they had two cannons. It looks really spectacular, I think, if you...
Yeah, on the left.
Yeah.
They look a bit like out of Command and Conquer.
And what's interesting, I read they had a horsepower of 2,300.
A short correction here. In the literature, the data ranges from 2,176 to 2,400 horsepower. Meanwhile, Jens had a chance to ask the German tank expert and engineer Rolf Hilmes, who was involved in the development. He noted that the 2,176 horsepower or 1,600 kilowatt is the correct value. Note, these values are for continuous power. Short-term peak power can be higher.
And the reason behind this is, of course, they should change their position very fast. So basically, it's the Sturmgeschütz concept, where fire, change position, fire, change position. And obviously, they tried it with 105 millimeter and 120 millimeter smoothbore, and obviously it didn't work that well. At least it was not efficient, and so they dissolved these prototypes, and they are now in the museums. And the Bundeswehr used the ATGM tank destroyer as Jaguar 1 and Jaguar 2. After the Cold War, they were also dissolved. And of course, this has also to do because the Wehrmacht veterans, of course, had the same in the 60s or in the 50s or even in the 70s. They had the same enemy in their mind. Yeah, in World War II, they fought against the Red Army, and in the Cold War, they had to be fought against the Soviet Union and their army, the Soviet army, and both enemies, which was basically the same, had huge masses of tanks, and this was the reason why Germany was so eager behind the development of such Tankograd.
One thing we should add, because somebody will point it out in the comments. You said sometimes rockets and sometimes missile, and here's the thing: in German you say just Rakete, which naturally translates to rocket, but in English you make the distinction between rocket, which is generally not guided, and a missile, which is guided. We don't have the distinction. We make it with an adjective. So before someone comments, I thought we add this here.
Yeah, okay, sorry, I didn't know I use it as a synonym because, as you say, it's in Germany.
It's very technical, because I think I'm not even sure if all native speakers make the distinction that way. But I remember when I looked up for the V1 and V2, and then since then I was like, okay, I used it there and here and all this technical stuff. So, but before somebody gets angry again and says,
in other states, let's take the superpowers, USA and Soviet Union. They also had vehicles, sometimes even armored vehicles, with anti-tank rockets or missiles in this case, as you said. But it never had this importance to them like in the West German army, in the Bundeswehr, because at first they didn't have the experience from World War II. Second, they were not facing in generally such a overwhelming tank enemy as this Bundeswehr would have in a real hot conflict, and so it didn't play that role. And you see it today. I think the Russian army now has a BMP, a more modern BMP, only armed with ATGMs, so with guided missiles. Again, so this concept is not really dead, but it hadn't in other armies, from my opinion, not so much importance for them.
So in a way, basically you have a cheap vehicle which is just there to destroy other tanks like the Hetzer, because you need something else besides infantry with anti-tank capabilities. Now, probably some people will ask what this is. Now, this looks like added armor. Additional, I forgot the name, how it's called. There's a special name in English. Anyway, this sounds like plastic. I guess it is plastic, and you probably wonder why. And these plates are not for protection against hollow charge warheads, as I initially assumed. According to Rolf Hilmes, there's no information about hollow charge protection in his notes. The protection is primarily designed against regular armor-piercing ammunition. You have about this space between the main armor and the plate. This distance is too short to disperse the metal jet of a modern hollow charge round unless additional measures would be added. Be aware that other add-on armor like the US sled armor does not necessarily work due to spacing, but other effects, like creating a short circuit in the fuse system of the RPG-7 warhead. In terms of armor protection, the front should be able to withstand 57mm armor-piercing composite rigid ammunition if the range is above 500 meters. Smaller caliber should not be able to penetrate up to 0 meters. Of course, keep in mind that the Jaguar was only in service until 2005 and probably has some weapon and/or ammunition that can penetrate that the German engineers did not account for at the time. A few additional words about the add-on armor. Inside these rubber plates there are 30mm high hardness armor plates, which can't be welded. As such, they were vulcanized into rubber and bolted on. Yet there's even more details to these bolts. These are not regular bolts, they are shock absorber bolts between these plates and the main hull. Why, you ask? Well, Rolf Hilmes notes the following about the add-on turret armor for the Leopard 1 A1. Even if projectiles do not penetrate the armor, they transfer their kinetic energy to the target on impact. In the process, 20mm projectiles can generate oscillations up to 6000 G. Being hit with 50 to 57mm ammunition often leads, even without penetration, to irreversible damage to optical devices, or produces misalignments of optical devices, or leads to damage to parts of the onboard electronics, like fuse boxes.
Okay.
Well, anything to add here?
No, that's it in short.
Okay. So thank you very much, Jens.
Thank you.
Thank you to the Military History Museum of the Bundeswehr in Dresden for inviting me. Thank you to all my supporters for making trips like this possible. As always, source list in the description. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye.
Bye.